If you're so smart, then pay your own bills. My mother's voice sliced through the heavy, humid air of our tiny apartment like broken glass. It was 100 degrees in Tampa, and the AC was rattling against the wall, barely pushing out a breath of cool air. I was still in my scrubs, smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion after a double shift at the blood bank. My feet throbbed in rhythm with the headache building behind my eyes. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She just stood there, sweat beading on her upper lip, shoving a stack of overdue notices into my hands, as if they were my fault for existing. "I already paid the rent," I said, staring at the red numbers screaming past due on the water bill. "Then pay the rest," she scoffed, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "If you're so educated, so independent, prove it. Pay your own bills." Something in me snapped. Not loudly. Just a quiet, clean break inside my chest. For years, I'd worked, studied, and handed over my paychecks while she played the victim of a life she refused to manage. That night, looking at the condensation dripping down her neck, I stopped feeling guilty. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I headed to my room, grabbed my backpack, and stuffed in 3 sets of scrubs, my laptop, and the cat carrier. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. "Where do you think you're going?" she yelled, following me down the hallway. "You told me to pay my own bills," I said quietly. "So, I'm going to live my own life." I walked out into the heavy Florida night and didn't look back. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My car was a 10-year-old sedan with a compressor that had died 3 summers ago. As I drove toward Chloe's apartment, the Florida humidity settled into the upholstery, heavy and suffocating. It felt fitting. For 24 years, I had lived in a different kind of heat, the stifling, airless pressure of my mother's expectations. The radio stayed off. I needed the silence to audit the noise in my head. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, Pamela calling. I let it vibrate against the leather until the screen went dark. In my line of work, you learn about veins. You learn that some are prominent, easy to tap, while others roll and hide. You learn that if you draw too much, the body goes into shock. My relationship with my mother wasn't a bond, it was a blood draw that never ended. I was the universal donor, and she was the hemorrhage. I kept wondering why I hadn't left sooner. Why did it take a scream about bills to finally snap the tether? The answer wasn't love. It was training. There is a concept I read about once called the invisible chain. It's how you train an elephant. When they are babies, you tie them to a stake with a heavy chain. They pull and pull, but they aren't strong enough to break it. Eventually, they stop trying. They learn that the limit is absolute. When they grow up into massive, powerful creatures, you can tie them with a flimsy rope to a plastic chair, and they won't move. They don't see the rope, they feel the memory of the chain. My mother had been grooming me for this role since I was 6 years old. She didn't teach me how to ride a bike. She taught me how to hide the eviction notices from the landlord. She didn't teach me math. She taught me how to balance a checkbook so we could afford cigarettes and bread. She framed my existence as a debt I had to repay. "I gave you life," she would say, usually right before asking for my babysitting money. "We're a team, Megan. It's us against the world." But teams have shared goals. We didn't have a goal. We had a subscription model where I paid the premiums, and she collected the benefits. I had been conditioned to believe that my financial stability was a betrayal of her poverty. If I had savings and she had debt, I was the bad daughter. Leaving felt impossible, not because the door was locked, but because I had been raised to believe I didn't own the key. I pulled into the visitor lot at Chloe's complex. The engine sputtered and died. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Tonight, the rope hadn't changed, the chain hadn't snapped. I had just finally realized I was the elephant. I was the one with the power, and for the first time in my life, I was going to use it to walk away. I grabbed the cat carrier and my laptop bag. The humid air felt different now, less like a weight, more like a curtain I had just pushed through. I walked up the stairs to Chloe's unit and knocked. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was calculating. Chloe didn't offer me a tissue. She didn't offer me a hug or a glass of wine to take the edge off. She knows me too well for that. She knows that when a vein blows, you don't comfort the patient, you apply pressure. She opened her laptop on the coffee table and cracked her knuckles. Social security number, she said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I recited the digits. Taking the seat next to her, I watched the screen reflect in her glasses. This wasn't a sleepover. This was an autopsy. We logged into the credit monitoring site. The loading circle spun for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the number flashed on the screen in bold, red font. $42,000. I stared at it. I blinked, waiting for the decimal point to move, but it stayed right where it was. $42,000 in outstanding debt. I don't have $42,000, I whispered. I have a student loan and a credit card with a $500 limit. Chloe clicked the details tab. The list cascaded down the screen like a receipt from hell. There were credit cards opened in my name when I was 18. There were utility bills for apartments I had never lived in. And there, sitting at the top of the pile, was a car loan. $26,000 for a mid-sized SUV purchased 3 years ago. I thought about my mom's new car. She had told me her brother, Uncle Gerald, helped her buy it. She told me it was a gift for getting her life back on track. I had believed her. I had even paid for the gas. It wasn't a gift. It was my credit score wrapped in metal and rubber. She bought a car, I said, my voice flat. She bought a car in my name, and she let me drive my clunker until the AC died. I waited for the tears. I waited for the heartbreak of realizing my mother had stolen my financial future before it had even begun. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, clinical numbness washed over me. It was the same feeling I got in the lab when I looked at a sample under the microscope, detached, analytical. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a crime scene. On the table, my phone lit up. It buzzed once, then again, then it started vibrating continuously, dancing across the wood surface. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Pamela. It was the Family Circle group chat. Aunt Teresa. Pamela just called me in tears. I can't believe you would abandon your mother like this. Uncle Gerald. She sacrificed everything to raise you alone. You ungrateful brat. Get back there and apologize. Aunt Teresa. She says you stole money from her purse before you left. We know what you are. The messages scrolled up the screen, a wall of text designed to crush me. They were the flying monkeys, the enablers who had watched my mother drain me dry for years and called it love. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the status quo. If I wasn't carrying the burden, one of them might have to, and that terrified them more than my mother's lies. Chloe reached for the phone, but I stopped her. Don't, I said. Don't block them. Why? Because, I said, picking up the phone and taking a screenshot of the accusations. Everything is evidence now. I looked back at the laptop screen, at the red numbers that defined my net worth. The sadness was gone. The guilt was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of a phlebotomist finding the vein. Print it, I told Chloe. Print everything. 1 month later, Tampa was baking under a heat dome. The asphalt radiated waves of heat that made the horizon shimmer. And the humidity index was holding steady at 105. It was the kind of heat that made people irrational. I sat in my new sublet, a single room I rented from a nurse I worked with, and watched the ceiling fan spin. It was small, but it was mine. The AC hummed a steady, reassuring rhythm. My name wasn't on the lease, but neither was my mother's. That was enough. My phone rang. It was Pamela. I had been waiting for this call. I had removed my name from the electric bill 29 days ago. The grace period ended today. I picked up. I didn't say hello. Megan! Her voice was shrill, panicked, already at an 11. What did you do? Why is everything off? What's off? I asked, my voice calm. The power, the lights, the TV, the AC. It just shut off. It's sweltering in here, Megan. My food is going to spoil. The fridge is already getting warm. Did you pay the bill? Don't play dumb with me. You always pay the bill. That's your job. Not anymore, I said. I took my name off the account the day I left. I told the company I wasn't responsible for the residents. They must have switched it to the occupant's name. That's you. There was a moment of silence, heavy and thick. I could hear the background noise of the apartment, the silence of the dead appliances. "You're trying to kill me," she whispered. The shift from anger to victimhood was instantaneous. It was her signature move. "It's 100 degrees. You want me to die of heat stroke. Is that it? You want your own mother dead?" I closed my eyes, picturing her. She was probably sitting on the couch, surrounded by the mess she refused to clean, sweating, performing her suffering for an audience of one. This is the illusion of power of the empty wallet. My mother operated on the belief that her needs were currency. She thought that if she was helpless enough, the world would have to save her. She believed her inability to function was a form of power because it forced others to function for her. She was a queen with no kingdom, demanding taxes from a peasantry that had already fled. But power requires leverage, and for the first time, she had none. "I don't want you dead," I said. "I want you to be an adult. Call the power company, set up a payment plan. It has nothing to do with me." "I can't," she screamed, the facade cracking. "I have no money. You know I have no money. Uncle Gerald won't give me any more until next week. You have to fix this. Put your card back on the account. Just for today. I'll pay you back." "No. I'll sue you," she shrieked. "I talked to a lawyer. Aunt Teresa gave me a number. This is elder abuse. Abandonment. I'm dependent on you. You can't just cut me off. A judge will make you pay." "Go ahead," I said. "Call the lawyer. Ask him about the $42,000 in credit card debt opened in my name. Ask him about the car loan. Ask him about the fraud." The line went dead silent. The breathing on the other end hitched. "You wouldn't," she breathed. "I already did," I said. "I filed the police report 2 weeks ago. The investigation is open." She hung up. I stared at the phone. My hand wasn't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. The only thing I felt was the cool air of my rented room, chilling the sweat on my skin. She was in the dark. But for the first time in my life, I could see everything perfectly clearly. 3 days later, I drove back to the apartment. I knew Pamela wasn't there. Aunt Teresa had posted a status update on Facebook about taking in family in their time of need, accompanied by a picture of my mother looking tragic on a floral sofa. The complex was silent. I still had my key. She hadn't changed the locks. Locks cost money. And she was currently hoarding every cent she could squeeze out of her sympathy tour. I opened the door, and the smell hit me like a physical wall. It was the scent of a dead refrigerator in a heatwave, sour milk, rotting vegetables, and the stale, humid air of a space that hadn't breathed in days. The apartment felt like a tomb. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew the layout of this trap by heart. I moved quickly to her bedroom. This wasn't a reminiscence tour. I needed my birth certificate and my social security card. The fraud investigator had told me I needed to secure my physical documents before she lost them or held them hostage. Her room was a shrine to chaotic consumption. Clothes with the tags still on them were piled on the chair. Boxes of as seen on TV gadgets gathered dust in the corner. It was a museum of impulse control issues. I checked the dresser. Nothing. I checked the nightstand. Just empty pill bottles and a stack of romance novels. Then I dropped to my knees and looked under the bed. There it was, a shoebox, an old sneaker box, taped shut with masking tape. I pulled it out. It rattled. I used my house key to slice the tape. Inside, it was a paper trail of my destruction. There were credit card applications, dozens of them. Some were filled out in her handwriting, practicing my signature in the margins like a teenager doodling a crush's name. There were rejection letters from banks I'd never heard of. There were approval letters for cards I never saw. I dug deeper. At the bottom of the box, beneath the layers of financial fraud, was a thick envelope from an insurance company. It wasn't a bill. It was a policy document. I opened it. Term life insurance. Insured. Megan V. Beneficiary. Pamela V. Benefit amount. $500,000. I sat back on my heels, the carpet rough against my skin. The sweat on my back suddenly felt freezing. I looked at the date. She had taken this out 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when I was working 60-hour weeks and driving a car with no brakes because she needed the repair money for rent. I read the fine print. The premiums were current. She had stopped paying the electric bill, she had stopped paying the rent, she had never paid for her own car. But this, she paid this every single month. I wasn't just a cash cow. I was a lottery ticket. A sickening clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about a desperate mother making bad choices. This was predatory. She was betting against my pulse. In her mind, my value had a cap. Alive, I was worth a monthly paycheck and a credit score. Dead, I was worth $500,000. If I worked myself to death, if I crashed that unsafe car, if the stress finally stopped my heart, she hit the jackpot. I looked around the dark, stifling room. I used to think she loved me in her own broken way. I used to think she was just bad with money. But you don't insure a child you love for $500,000 while stealing their identity. You insure an asset. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I carefully placed the policy into my bag, right next to the credit card applications. I had come here for a birth certificate. I was leaving with a motive. I stood up, dusting the lint off my knees. The air in the apartment felt heavier now, charged with a malice I had been too blind to see. I walked out of the room, out of the apartment, and into the sunlight. I wasn't just fighting for my credit score anymore. I was fighting for my life. Aunt Teresa's house smelled like potpourri and judgment. I walked in, Chloe a half step behind me carrying a thick black binder. The family meeting was exactly what I expected, an ambush. Pamela sat in the center of the beige sectional, flanked by Uncle Gerald and Aunt Teresa. They had staged it perfectly. My mother held a tissue to her dry eyes, looking small and persecuted. On the coffee table sat a plate of cookies that no one was eating. A prop for a wholesome family gathering that didn't exist. "Megan," Aunt Teresa said, her voice dripping with disappointed matriarch energy. "We're glad you finally decided to stop running. Your mother is willing to forgive you, but we need to set up a payment plan for the arrears." "Forgive me?" I asked. I didn't sit down. "For the abandonment," Uncle Gerald rumbled. "For leaving her to rot in the dark. We know you're stressed. But family supports family. We've drawn up a contract. You pay the back rent and the electric, and we'll forget the police call." Pamela looked up, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She thought she had won. She thought the pressure of the collective glare would force the elephant back onto the chain. "I didn't come here to pay," I said, placing the shoebox on the table, right on top of the untouched cookies. "I came to show you what you're defending." I opened the box. I took out the stack of credit card applications first. I fanned them out like a winning poker hand. Capital One, Chase, Discover, all in my name. All opened while I was at work, all signed by her. Aunt Teresa frowned, picking up a statement. These are just bills." "Those are felonies," Chloe corrected, her voice sharp and professional. "Identity theft. Wire fraud. Mail fraud." "I did what I had to do," Pamela snapped, the victim mask slipping. "I fed you. I clothed you. That money was for us. And this?" I pulled out the life insurance policy. "Was this for us?" I dropped the thick document in front of Uncle Gerald. He read the cover page. His face went gray. "Term life," he muttered. $500,000. "She bet against my life," I said, looking directly at my mother. She wasn't worried about my future. She was calculating my payout. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed, but the heat in the room was suffocating. Pamela stood up, her hands balling into fists. "You ungrateful little witch. I'll sue you." I talked to a lawyer. In Florida, there are filial responsibility laws. You have to support me. If you don't pay my debts, a judge will garnish your wages until you do. She looked around the room for support, desperate to regain the narrative. "Tell her, Gerald, she can't just leave me with nothing." I looked at Chloe. She stepped forward. "Actually," Chloe said, "she can. And she did." "You can't sue for support when you're the subject of an active criminal investigation," I said. "I filed the fraud report with the police 3 days ago. I gave them everything in this box." Pamela froze. "And just now," Chloe added, tapping her phone, You admitted in front of 3 witnesses that you opened those accounts and that the debt was for us. That's a confession. We're done here. Pamela's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The leverage was gone. The guilt was gone. The flying monkeys looked from the policy, to the credit cards, to the woman they had enabled for decades, and for the first time, they didn't see a martyr. They saw a liability. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me with a solid, final click. It was the sound of a verdict. 2 weeks later, I sat in my car across the street from the apartment complex. It was raining, a heavy, cleansing Florida downpour that washed the dust off the palm trees. The sheriff's deputies were there. I watched as they placed the eviction notice on the door. I watched as a crew began to haul the sofa, the one she had sat on while she spent my future, out to the curb. It looked smaller out there in the rain, sadder. I didn't feel joy. Revenge isn't sweet. That's a lie people tell to sell movies. Revenge is heavy. It's exhausting, but as I watched the apartment empty out, I felt the phantom weight of the invisible chain dissolve. I used to think that cutting off a parent was a sin. Society tells us that blood is sacred, that the bond between mother and daughter is unbreakable. But in medicine, we know the truth. If a limb becomes gangrenous, if it starts to poison the blood and stop the heart, you don't keep it because you're fond of it, you cut it off. It's not cruelty. It's a life-saving amputation. I realized then that I hadn't abandoned her. I had escaped her. I had stopped setting myself on fire to keep her warm. The guilt that had plagued me for years was just the phantom pain of a severed limb, real to the nerves, but no longer part of the body. I started the car. The AC kicked on, cool and crisp. I had $42,000 of debt to clear. It would take years. I had a credit score to rebuild and trust issues that would probably take a lifetime to untangle. But as I drove away from the curb, leaving the wet sofa and the empty shoebox behind, I checked my bank account. The balance was low. But for the first time in 24 years, every cent in it belonged to me. If you've ever had to save yourself by walking away from the people who were supposed to protect you, share this story. You are not alone.